Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. In this session, experts from Redshift and Entrust are going to be taking a look at what you need to have in place to be email happy in 2024. So throughout the course of the session today, we'll be running through loads of interesting content, which I'm sure may well prompt you to have a few questions or need some clarification. So if that happens, feel free to pop those in the question or chat functionality within the Livestorm platform, and I'll be monitoring all of those and then posing it to Chris and Brian at the end of the session. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the experts who are running the show today. Chris, Brian, it's all yours.
Great. Thanks, Claire, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our attendees. Chris and I appreciate you taking the time today to listen to our presentation. I think you'll get more details on some of the exciting happenings we're all hearing about in the email space, hopefully new information that you may not have heard yet, and then some action plans to comply with the new requirements specifically for Google and Yahoo to ensure optimal email delivery. So I'm Brian Westnage. I look after our alliances and partnerships here at Redshift, including our partnership with Entrust. Been in the DMARC space since it started, and very excited to talk to you today. So my compatriot, who I've presented many times around BIMI, Verified Mark Certificates, and DMARC, is Chris Bailey, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks, Claire. Yes, as Brian indicated, my name is Chris Bailey. I work with Entrust. I run the Search Solutions Group. My title is VP of Trust Services. The Certificate Solutions Group includes all of our TLS, SSL certificates, public and private, as well as the VMC, SBIME, code signing certificates, etc. We run some of the largest companies in the world for their security. Across a whole set of various verticals, especially strong in government and financial. And thank you again for taking the time out of your busy schedules to listen to us today. And we encourage you to ask questions in the chat, and we'll try to answer them at the end of the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Chris. And just briefly, our agenda for today, certainly we want to talk about what's going on at Google and Yahoo, and then a little bit about what you need to do from an email authentication perspective to get the basics right, and then talk about some of the great things that are available to you once you reach DMARC compliance and have your email authentication in order. Chris will really drill down into the BIMI and VMC landscape, and then we'll talk about some predictions of what we think the rest of 2024 and beyond has in store for all of us. So I think it won't be a surprise to most folks because you wouldn't have signed up for this webinar otherwise to know that Google and Yahoo, starting in February, have some new documented requirements for email senders. And when I say documented, a lot of what Google and Yahoo are talking about and have published on their Postmaster blog sites, they are really taking what has been known, and especially in the deliverability space, as best practices for many years. But they're really putting it down on paper, giving some very detailed guidance around what senders need to do to comply, and then talking about what will happen now if senders do not comply. So I think, should we panic here on, January 17th because we're very close to February 1st? I would say there's no reason to panic, but you should prepare. Is your mail that's not compliant going to be blocked immediately on February 1st? I would say not very likely, which is the good news. And Google has even published specifics on what they're going to do to kind of ramp up enforcement of the guidelines. They're not going to block all of your non-compliant mail on day one. They're going to return back some temporary errors with some error codes. They're telling you what's wrong. Starting in February and March and April, they're just going to ramp up, and they may send you, they may bulk or junk mail some of your non-compliant mail, and then later on in the first half of the year, you may start seeing mail get blocked. So don't panic, but prepare. And some of the things you can do to prepare are ultimately things, and especially if you're using a service provider to send your mail, a lot of the requirements your service provider is going to have taken care of for you. The new requirements, you have to have SPF and DKIM on all mail streams. You need to have an aligned from domain for either your SPF or your DKIM domain. So what does that mean? The from domain that the recipient sees in their email client, the friendly from, if you will, that from domain must match either the SPF or the DKIM domain. Ideally both, but that's not always possible. Some service providers that you might use, they'll use an SPF domain that they own and control so they can process bounces, for instance. So that's not uncommon. And almost always, if you're using a service provider, it is under your control to send DKIM aligned email. You can publish a DKIM key and a DKIM record for your custom domain that you're using to send. So the good news about that as well is that DKIM alignment, if you will, also ensures that your mail passes DMARC. So it's a win-win proposition from an email authentication perspective, is if you send either SPF or DKIM aligned email, your mail passes DMARC. So one of the new requirements, certainly that you wouldn't have had to comply with before when mailing into Google and Yahoo, is to publish a DMARC policy with at least a policy of none. So that is new. Hasn't been a requirement just for email sending purposes at Google and Yahoo. If you have wanted to take advantage of things like BIMI with a VMC, DMARC compliance has been required and still is. So DMARC policy of quarantine or reject. But just for sending mail into Yahoo and Google environments, you have not had to have a DMARC record in the past. Now you have to have a DMARC policy of at least none. You want to keep your spam rates under 0.3%, and Google specifically says 0.1% as measured in Google Postmaster tools. If you generate a high number of complaints today, you're probably already going to be aware of it. You're going to see those statistics in your service provider reporting. If you send mail from on-prem systems, you probably would have seen deferrals or rejections if you have high spam complaint rates already. So really, they are putting an exact number to a complaint rate threshold, but it is not, like I said, there's probably been a canary in your spam complaint coal mine already, letting you know that you have problems already. This is just a very hard measurement of what Google and Yahoo are looking for. Another requirement is you have to have an easy unsubscribe function. This is new, has not been a requirement to mail into Google and Yahoo in the past. Certainly it was always a best practice, but is now a requirement to have an easy unsub with one-click unsub in the header. You have to have a visible unsub link in your message body. And unlike the CAN Spam Act, you need to process your unsubscribes within 2 days rather than the legacy, I would say, 10-day requirement of CAN Spam. CAN Spam has nothing to do with these requirements, by the way, but the 2-day requirement for unsub processing may be news to others in your organization that are more familiar with that CAN Spam requirement. Another requirement is you have to have reverse DNS on your sending domains and IPs. Again, if you use a service provider, they will almost certainly have this taken care of for you. It would likely only apply to mail that's being sent from on-prem systems and is considered a bulk sender in the eyes of Google and Yahoo. You need to ensure a TLS connection for transmitting email. Again, something taken care of by your service providers. and automatically in corporate mail environments like Office 365 and Google Workspace. And then finally, I didn't put this in the bullet here, but you cannot impersonate Gmail or Yahoo.com anymore. That means if you were using a service provider and you were sending emails, let's say company name at gmail.com or company name at yahoo.com, and you were sending mail from a service provider's platform, not Google or Yahoo, that mail is no longer going to be accepted. So basically what that means is use a custom sending domain, use one of your own domains or a subdomain of one of your current domains to send mail going forward. I don't think that'll be a big issue for most senders, but very small senders potentially could be affected by that. And even though they might be affected by that requirement, they may not be sending enough mail to meet the bulk sender requirement of Google and Yahoo. So Google has kind of said, hey, we consider bulk senders to be people that send 5,000 pieces of mail into our environment every day. Yahoo has said, we're not going to put a number to that. I mean, and they're just going to say, hey, we know a bulk sender when we see them. So I would say essentially, if you are sending, mail, if you're using a service provider to send mail, you're generally going to be a bulk sender. It's just that if you're a retailer, you might send many millions of messages a day. If you're a smaller sender, you may not send quite as many a day, especially from other non-marketing platforms, maybe your Salesforces or your HR systems, et cetera. But just keep in mind that bulk number, I would not get too wrapped up into that 5,000 emails a day that Google publishes. I would just make sure that you're compliant with all these regulations. Don't get focused on the absolute number. Just focus on these requirements and complying with them. All right, so the good news for this audience is that you are highly educated. I would say you're ahead of the curve, probably look better than our average, email sender as well, just a guess. But 89% of you already have a DMARC record of any kind. So that is great news. That is much higher than just if we took a population off the street and looked at their email domain. So this was the domain that you registered for the webinar with, your corporate email domain. So
Oh, Brian, I think we've lost your audio. I don't know if you just want to try muting and unmuting again. Oh, but we can hear someone else's. Who is that?
So sorry, Claire, where did you lose me?
Yep, you're back in the room. Excellent. So you were just talking about the audience is very educated and running through the percentage of DMARC records and just moving your way on to discussing BIMI and VMC.
Perfect. Yep. So clearly this audience was educated, doing great with your DMARC compliance already. Subdomains will inherit the DMARC policy of the top level domain. So the good news is if you have a DMARC record at your top level domain, your subdomains will inherit that policy, and you can publish different explicit records for your subdomains if you want. But the good news is if you're generally DMARC compliant at your top level domain, your subdomains will have a DMARC record as well. And again, for this audience, most of you are actually at DMARC compliance already with a DMARC policy of quarantine or reject. So kudos to you. The good news, and Chris will talk about this, is when your DMARC policy is quarantine or reject, you qualify for BIMI with a VMC. So that's kind of, Google and Yahoo are taking a big stick right now with email senders and saying, hey, if you don't comply with these new requirements, you're actually going to impact your email delivery. That's the stick, but a carrot is, hey, once you get to DMARC compliance, you are eligible for BIMI with VMC. And Chris will go into a little more detail on that here shortly. But 7 of our attendees today actually already have BIMI records with a VMC on their domain. So kudos to you. One piece of email authentication, I think, for large senders sometimes that can be a challenge is broken SPF records. So SPF records that exceed the 10 lookup limit of SPF. So there's some folks on the phone, nine of our attendees had SPF records that exceeded the 10 lookups. I think the highest I saw was 27 lookups on one corporate domain. Again, that might be your corporate domain, out of the control sometimes for folks that work on the marketing side of things. But and not just because your SPF record is broken doesn't mean that you're not compliant with the new Yahoo and Google regulations. There's no requirement that your mail actually pass authentication. You just have to have it in place. But obviously, you want to make sure that your mail passes authentication to ensure that it has the best chance of delivery, especially if your DMARC policy is quarantine or reject. Your legitimate mail might be getting affected if your SPF record is broken. So something to look at. And then a few of our attendees were right at that 10 lookup limit, which means that they've probably been kind of manually manipulating their SPF record to stay right at 10 lookups or under. So I'll talk a little bit in a second about how you can make that whole process easier. So I think 2024 is going to be the year to get your email authentication and your email security in order. It's always a good time to have good email authentication, but 2024 really makes the stakes, I would say, a little higher potentially than they have been in the past. From what we see at Redsift, especially when we're talking to IT and security audiences, is that email kind of remains the biggest problem for most organizations in terms of the threats they see. Most companies are doing a pretty good job at securing their infrastructure. They use a lot of cybersecurity solutions to protect their infrastructure from attacks. So if I'm a bad guy and I want to get access to the organization, the easiest way to do that today is to attack people rather than machines. And the way you attack people is through email and through phishing. So a lot of the really hard to detect phishing that we see is, not the old Nigerian print scams of the past. It's really highly targeted, one-to-one communication, research potentially via sites like LinkedIn, using ChatGPT or other AI tools to make the language look reasonable and presentable. No spelling errors, no kind of the telltale signs that we all used to be able to see and just say, oh, that's obviously phishing. It's a lot harder to make that determination these days. The good news is with DMARC, you don't have to make that determination. DMARC doesn't look at the content of the message. DMARC just says, hey, I got this message from this domain, claims to be, I got a message from somebody that claims to be sending mail from this domain, and it either passes DMARC authentication or it doesn't. And if it doesn't pass, then the mail will get blocked if your DMARC policy is quarantine or reject. The challenges with implementing DMARC is you don't want to block any legitimate mail that fails authentication along with spoofing that's trying to impersonate you and fail authentication. So you want to make sure, I've seen some service providers tell customers, hey, put in a DMARC record with a policy of reject. And there's no mechanism to send reports either to an internal mailbox or a service provider like Redsift. I would be very careful with that guidance, and I would only do that if you're sure that the only mail you send from that domain is sent from that service provider who has represented that they're authenticating your mail. So I would not send a DMARC policy of quarantine or reject without any reporting addresses for any domain that you're not sure is. So we can help you a little bit with that as well. But just taking a quick step back, folks, on the marketing side, you probably heard of DMARC. It's been kind of maybe in the back of your mind, or maybe you learned about it when you were researching BIMI and VMCs. I think, whereas deliverability was not necessarily top of mind for marketers, let's say, 15, 20 years ago, I'd say it's top of mind now. And where DMARC was not necessarily top of mind for marketers, let's say 10 years ago, I think it is top of mind now, especially because of these requirements. DMARC's been around now for going on 12 years. stands for Domain-Based Message Authentication Reporting and Conformance. The reporting piece is very interesting. So prior to DMARC, domain owners could not really get reporting easily on how their sending domains were authenticating and or if their sending domains were being impersonated. So the reporting part of DMARC is really important. That gives you information as the domain owner. Hey, are there things I need to fix? Hey, my SPF record doesn't cover this mail stream, or I have SPF in place, but it doesn't align with the from domain, or hey, my DKIM, I'm not using DKIM on this mail stream. So that reporting aspect of DMARC is really important. Will give you the insight you need to fix any authentication issues. And the good news is, again, if you're using a service provider, one of the reasons you use a service provider is for them to take care of this for you. It's just your internal mail streams, your corporate mail that might be controlled by colleagues in IT. That mail is traditionally folks have less insight into, and then the DMARC reporting can kind of illuminate that for you. So how does DMARC work? Well, a message is received by Google and Yahoo from a domain. They look up the DMARC. First they will do standard authentication checks. Does this mail pass SPF? Does it pass DKIM? And now does it align either SPF or DKIM? They'll look up the domain and see if it has a DMARC record of any kind. Now you have to have a DMARC record with at least a policy of none. If your policy is quarantine or reject and the mail fails DMARC, it will either be junked or blocked. If the message passes authentication because it's a message that you've legitimately sent from an in-house platform or a third-party platform, message will just be routed as normal. So it is a straightforward proposition in the IT and security space. It's not a black box, but if you don't have visibility into how your mail authenticates, if somebody decided in your organization to just change your DMARC policy or quarantine or reject without ensuring that you've authenticated all that mail, you could be in trouble. So what does a DMARC record look like? You all have probably heard, hey, you should have a DMARC record. Well, DMARC is a text record that you publish in your DNS. So somebody in your organization who publishes your SPF records and other DNS records can publish the DMARC record for you. Again, ideally at the top level domain, because all your subdomains will inherit your DMARC record. You always start with a policy of none. That just means give me reporting and visibility into my mail streams, but don't take any action, Google and Yahoo, if my mail fails authentication. So you always start with a policy of none. That gives you reporting and visibility into your authentication practices. And then once you have that visibility, you basically correct authentication issues on all your legitimate mail streams. And then you publish generally policy of quarantine, ensure that all your legitimate mail is being delivered, any spoofing or impersonation is getting filtered. And then finally, the most secure setting for DMARC is to publish a DMARC policy reject, where all unauthenticated and potentially malicious mail gets blocked. So I would say some of our customers have run into situations where they might already be a quarantine or reject on a particular domain, and the service provider is saying, hey, to comply with Google and Yahoo, you have to have a DMARC policy of none. I would not.
Brian, your sound is keeping you on your toes again. If you wouldn't mind just unmute. It's a fun little quirk. See if we can hear you again.
All right, fun fact for those of you that are on Macs and you have other people in your household that are on Apple devices, sometimes your sound switches to their Apple devices. So my apologies. I'm learning that today very acutely. So where did you lose me, Claire?
Literally about 5 or 10 seconds before I pointed it out. Right. So
yep,
we're good.
Don't replace any existing DMARC records unless you have a good reason to. Is kind of what it comes down to from our perspective. If you have any questions about this, certainly ask your service provider, or if you're using a DMARC provider, please ask. But yeah, we don't want people lessening their email security because they think that they need a DMARC policy of none to comply with Google and Yahoo. Google and Yahoo, and Chris will talk about this a little later, eventually they want to get people to move on from a policy of none and to get to a higher level of security with quarantine or reject that also allows you to qualify for BIMI with a VMC. So moving on, probably don't have to remind this audience of the benefit of DMARC compliance from a email delivery perspective. Hey, you have to send DMARC compliant mail already to comply with Google and Yahoo's requirements. So you need, there's no way around it. Send DMARC compliant mail, have a DMARC policy of at least none. But certainly once you authenticate your mail, that's one signal that the message is wanted. Of course, you're still, just because you authenticate your mail properly, doesn't mean that your mail streams aren't still subject to other deliverability requirements like maintaining low spam complaint rates, keeping your list clean, removing bounces and unsubscribes. Generally though, Yahoo and Google are always going to send mail that people want to receive, and you'll be fine. Obviously that is a science and an art of sending mail that people want to receive. The science is email authentication, making sure you're compliant there. The art is sending mail that people want to receive and don't complain about. So, and then finally, for your colleagues in IT and security, the side effect of you focusing on getting DMARC compliant and email authentication compliant for your marketing mail streams or your service provider mail streams is that they will benefit from that as well. From a security perspective, is no one will be able to spoof those domains once you get to a policy of quarantine or reject. So won't be a surprise. I will spend just a short moment here to talk about that. Redshift, one of our primary functions is to help people get DMARC compliant. So we have a SaaS solution called OnDMARC. For many years, we've been helping customers get to DMARC compliance quickly, safely, and with a minimum of effort. We have some really nice automation that can host DMARC records for you, so you can change the policy from a console rather than in DNS manually. We can host your SPF record for you, so those folks that have SPF records greater than 10, we can actually dynamically flatten your SPF records for you, make SPF management a lot easier. We can host your DKIM record as well, and we can just make life easier. But the whole goal of a DMARC policy, or the whole goal of a DMARC project, if you will, should be getting to DMARC compliance. You want, even though Yahoo and Google are saying start with a DMARC policy of none, you really want to get to a policy of quarantine or reject, because otherwise you're just getting visibility into your issues and you're not stopping somebody from impersonating you. And you also never qualify for some of the benefits of getting to DMARC compliance, such as BIMI with VMC. So we have a very nice integration with Entrust where our customers can actually apply for the verified mark certificate from our console. We make things very easy for folks to get to DMARC compliance and then to get the verified mark certificate from Entrust. So before I turn over to Chris, what can you do today? Like, you're curious what your situation is with your domain? /investigate.
Uh-oh, Brian. I can't hear you again.
We will tell you immediately if you're compliant with Google and Yahoo's new requirements. Anything that we can see from a message. We won't know your spam complaint rates, of course, but every other kind of technical infrastructure requirement, we will be able to immediately tell you if you're compliant with these new requirements. So please do this if you have any questions. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
Thank you, Brian. All right. I'm getting a little bit of feedback So you might want to put your other mics on mute. So let's start with the first piece. So we learned about DMARC. Many of you already know about BIMI, but it stands for Brand Indicators for Message Authentication. It allows you to put an avatar image into the avatar slot for the various mail clients. Today, several providers mailbox providers are supporting it. Google was the first to launch. Apple announced a support last year, and it's really been taking off ever since. So as you can see here, without BIMI, you really don't have a way to send, at least with a larger email send, to show an avatar image with an email, and on the right-hand side of that example, you can. Next slide. So in order to make this work in Google and Apple, the BIMI specification needs to have a verified mark certificate. And just to unveil exactly what a verified mark certificate is, it basically is a cryptographic container that holds multiple data points of vetted information about an organization, including the organization name, the address, and the registered trademark information, which the image that's embedded into the certificate actually represents. So this is something that's that's been we've been working on for a long time, and it first came out around 2021 in June, and it's picking up. I know some people have questions about other service providers that might be supporting it, and we'll try to get to those questions at the end. Next slide. So, how does this work? Basically, you need to have DMARC as the base level. So when you have a DMARC that has a certain policy of quarantine or reject, so quarantine 100% or reject percentage 0 or higher, you're going to be able to make this work. And you need BIMI in order to create that connection. In essence, it's a text record along with a specification that indicates how you're supposed to use this information. And the mailbox provider will display that. Of course, you need a VMC if you want it to work with Gmail or Apple. But there's also another way to convey the information, and that's via an image, an SVG image that can also be associated with that BIMI record. And some mailbox providers provide that. But if you do want this to show with the other email providers like Gmail and Apple, you must have a VMC. So together, you have to have the DMARC, the BIMI record, and then the VMC to make all this work together. Next slide. So some of the benefits of why you should care. You have this differentiation in the mailbox to show your registered trademark image. And of course, that could help you increase open rates. That difference comparatively to others really separates yourself from other email providers or other email senders. And then as far as the improved email delivery, we just saw that with DMARC as a requirement, it probably is going to substantially maybe not help, but if you don't have it properly installed, you're definitely not going to have the same email delivery. So that's just going to be the nature of this. And as Brian referred to it, the DMARC requirement is a stick. The image to being able to display is the carrot. So that's the way that this is going forward. Next slide. So we did some studies together with Redsift a while back. And what we wanted to do is test some of these benefits and put some numbers behind them. And we asked you really 3 questions. After seeing this image, do you recall the brand that you saw? Do you think you might click on the open rate or click on this email more often? And would it influence your behavior, your call to action? Would you actually follow through? And we got some surprising answers. 44% said it did help with brand recall. So that's a wonderful stat to give to the marketing team if anyone's from marketing. Open rates, it does seem to help in the open rates when you have that image displayed along with other sites that might not have their images on that same email page. And then purchase increase. Can you influence the buying behavior, the call to action? And we saw that in that survey, 32% of respondents indicated that they would be more likely to click on that information or on that purchase if there was an offering. Next slide. Some of the brands and many, there are thousands and thousands of companies out there already that have this today. You can see here there are some substantial brands out there, and I won't go over all of them, but just to let you know who's doing it. Next slide. So today, we have verified mark certificates that display your logo in Gmail and Apple. And additionally, about 9 months ago, Google came out with a check mark, a blue check mark that appears on your emails that indicates that the email was verified, has a verified logo, and the email has actually been authenticated to at least the domain. So that check mark has also been a big driver of VMC. So you get that with the VMC in the Gmail environment. And in Apple, it's just the image. You have to have a registered trademark to use a VMC. So that's one of the prerequisites. So along with, not only do you have to have the DMARC of policy, quarantine, or higher, but if you want the VMC, we have to authenticate your organization and confirm that the organization has control over the registered trademark for the organization. So registered trademark is filed in the United States, it's filed with the USPTO. And once you're granted that, then we can actually use that image and embed it into the VMC certificate. That is, fairly trivial for large organizations that already have them. For small organizations, it might be a little bit more difficult. They might not have that yet. So we are working on piloting alternatives for logo verification, and to use things that are more common marks that should actually help expand this market. So I would just be on the lookout for that. We can't give timing, but because we have so many types of these certificates, we might be changing the family name to something called mark certificates. So today we have verified mark certificates and government mark certificates. And government mark are a little bit different than verified marks, in that we don't look at the trademark offices. We look at statutes and decrees that legalize the use of that logo in that particular country. And that's actually, we introduced that about a year ago. And then the timing of these new products would also would be probably in the next 4 months or so if they actually passed all the checks for us. And that's actually what's coming. So, and be on the lookout for that. And certainly we can keep everyone up to date if they would like to. Just let us know. Next slide. So, we talked about the carrot and stick. Just to kind of give you a snapshot of this. What are we talking about again? The verified mark signet, the ability to show your logo in the avatar slot of these email providers, the mailbox providers. It basically is the carrot. You have to have a verified mark to show it in Apple and Gmail, and you also get that blue check mark in Gmail. And you have to have the DMARC policy of quarantine or 100% or reject. And then the stick, as Brian indicated, they're starting to turn the dial up. Today, it's just DMARC reporting, which is policy of none. And if you are sending over 5,000 emails a day and Gmail, that's what they're saying they're going to do, is turn that up such that you're going to have issues with your email delivery if you exceed those, or if you don't meet those thresholds. So I think the thing is, we can't say what the email providers are going to do, the mailbox providers, but I think the writing was on the wall. This is the beginning, and you're going to see this dial turn up. So it could be that they pull down the numbers from 5,000 to 2,500 in the future. It could be that they move from policy of none to quarantine. And it could be other email providers are explicit about this too. But this is generally, I think you should take this as directionally correct, that you want to be ahead of this curve, if at all possible. So you can enjoy the carrot and sort of not have to worry too much about the stick, potentially, I should say, the dynamic stick that might be tuned up in the future. All right, so what we would like to do is encourage you to go to Redshift Tools BIMI. This will give you an indication of where you stand, kind of referring back to the top of the presentation. Brian already showed you that most of you already have a fairly good DMARC stance. Many of you don't have the VMC. So if you do or you don't, I would encourage you to use this tool to kind of see where you stand, and you can use it to improve your services. If you do need help with that, we can certainly help you. And Brian is more than happy to get you connected to the right people. So the Redshift tool, not only shows your DMARC status, but it also shows if you have a BIMI properly configured and the logo is properly issued and is going to display in your various environments. And you get very actionable steps of what you need to do to get there. So that's the great thing about the tool. If you want to know more about the VMC, I encourage you to go to entrust.com/VMC. We have lots of information for you there. And there were some very specific questions, I think, that were in the Q&A. I'm more than happy to answer those. But if you want to go to the next page, Claire.
Yeah, that's a nice segue, Chris. You're right, there's been plenty of questions coming in. So I'll tell you what, I know we're kind of a bit pressed for time, but let's go ahead. We'll work our way through them, because everyone who attends the call today will get a copy of the recording. So you can always fast forward to the 45-minute mark and listen to these questions back. So it gives us the opportunity to discuss them in a bit more detail. So forgive me, I might be slightly all over the place asking the questions, because I'm just going to put them to you as they've come in on the various chat and question panels. So let's start at the top. So let's start with the BIMI ones, actually. So we've got a question around if a current trademark logo isn't in a nice square format, so for example, has an image and a text associated with it, and they would only like to use the image for their VMC, do they need to go around trademarking them individually? How does that work? Can you crop a trademark logo for use in VMC?
So there's likely always going to be you want to get your aspect ratio and your registered trademark as close to 1-to-1 as possible. So, 1 unit high, 1 unit in width. So that's going to give you the best image, and trying to have that in a just as an image will probably also, unless you have a very short name, will be your best bet. So I would definitely try to do a registered trademark on that. If you have a word mark, which is a special type of registered trademark, let's say your name is Camel Travel. You can write that and create an image with that. Basically, it has to be legible. So if you want just to use that, that's also something you can use. Obviously, every character you add creates more difficulty in creating that to be a more legible name. So that's you want to put that into consideration as well.
Great, fab. Actually, I'm going to go through and I'm going to pick out all the BIMI ones first. So I think we touched on this a couple of times, but it did come through. So do Outlook and Microsoft support BIMI?
Outlook and Microsoft. So today they do not support. And I think the follow-up question is, okay, when are they going to support it? The answer to that question, I really can't discuss, what Microsoft is going to be doing. But if I were a betting man, I would probably say that they, if they're going to support it, it'll probably be in the next 18 months. And I think there's a probability in favor of supporting it will likely happen.
Fabulous. So I think those are all the BIMI related questions. So I'm just going to move on to the Google Yahoo related questions now. And some of them are a little more kind of complex and configuration level specific. So Brian, just let me know if perhaps we need to, give more space to those answers, in which case I can contact the person who's asked the question and we can set up some time individually to run through that. So we spoke quite a lot around this 5,000 email limit. So is that email limit per user within the organization, or is it at a domain level?
Domain level. Yep. So, and one thing to keep in mind is Google has said these requirements apply today to mail being sent to gmail.com users, not Google Workspace users. So if you're a B2B mailer, you don't send a lot of mail to either Gmail users or Yahoo users. You likely won't be subject to these requirements today, although I think it's fair to say that Google will evaluate these requirements related to mailing to Gmail recipients, see how things go, and then eventually make it a requirement for mailing into Google Workspace users as well. So it's fair to say that I think Google will count any mail sent from what they call a primary domain, which to me means the top level domain. They're going to aggregate any mail sent from subdomains of that primary domain and use that for their 5,000 message threshold. Again, my advice would be don't focus on the 5,000 too much. Focus on what you can control in terms of locking down your email authentication and complying with the other requirements, regardless of to whom you send and how much you send.
Okay, so in a similar vein, when we're talking about these, the enforcement of these requirements, do you know if Google and Yahoo are going to be enforcing these at an IP or a domain level? Have they made that clear?
I would almost certainly expect them to be enforced at a domain level.
At a domain level?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Chris. So let me just carry on scrolling. So again, the question around one of the requirements that we spoke about at the top of the hour was around passing, I believe the language is SPF or DKIM. Is that correct? It's or not and. However, we would say best practice is to have both passing, right?
Correct. The new requirements state you must use both SPF and DKIM, and one of those authentication methods must have alignment. So your from domain that you use, the friendly from domain, that domain must match either the SPF or DKIM domain. That's the alignment piece, and that is the same requirement to pass DMARC as well. So yes, if you can align both SPF and DKIM domains, if that's not possible, one is acceptable.
Fab. So just coming back to who the email addresses affected by these requirements. So in the scenario of a Microsoft domain emailing 5,000 plus Gmail users, personal Gmail users, they would be expected to abide by these new regulations.
Correct. It doesn't matter what platform you send from. It's all about who you're sending to, in this case, gmail.com specifically, not Google Workspace addresses and Yahoo addresses. One thing to keep in mind about Microsoft outside of their timeline to implement BIMI is the only thing they've stated about new requirements for senders mailing into Microsoft environments, either Outlook.com or Office 365 environments, is they've just published a bulletin that's referred to Google and Yahoo and told Microsoft customers, hey, you want to be aware of this, these new requirements mailing to Google and Yahoo. They haven't said anything about mailing into Microsoft environments yet. So my best guess is they're going to sit back, watch how things go with Google and Yahoo, and then potentially follow suit. They've done that in the past with other email authentication protocols, DMARC, SPF, and other things. So my guess is they're taking a wait and see approach, and then they might possibly adopt the same guidelines. And other mailbox providers could do the same as well. So Comcast, et cetera. The one thing I would just say again is, generally speaking, any service provider you work with, any mail stream you send, follow the Google and Yahoo requirements, and your mail will get better delivery everywhere, regardless of whether or not they have these specific requirements documented.
Yeah, great point, Brian. And kind of speaks to a comment I can see that's just come in around a lot of these requirements have been recommended for a long time. And what we're seeing now with this rolling enforcement from February onwards by Google is it's going from, we really think you should do this, to you need to start doing this because we've got to improve the overall health of our users' inboxes, making them a bit less spammy.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to pick
That's the ultimate goal. Clean up inboxes, make sure people are only receiving mail that they want to receive. The majority of mail that Google and Yahoo receive from the internet is not communications from brands or companies, and it's not one-to-one communication between people. It is phishing, spoofing, malware, and spam. So this is, they're finally saying, look, we've had enough of this, and authentication and these other requirements, this is how we help determine whether a message is legitimate and wanted.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just gonna wrap up by just addressing a couple more comments, and then I'll let everyone go about their day or their evening, depending on what part of the world you're in. So I know people are desperate for a bit more information. So for those of you who are lucky enough to already be Redshift customers, we are running a tech track session on the 25th of Jan, which you're more than welcome to join. In that session, one of our customer success engineers will be going through these kind of nitty-gritty questions where you can ask specific questions around your email configuration and setup, and how you can make sure you're ready for these upcoming changes. As I mentioned, I will also be emailing out to everybody who's attended today a copy a link to the recording, and I'll also include in the email a link through to our recent blog post, which is a comprehensive guide to all of these requirements, and also links through to tools that you can use, such as the Google Postmaster tools, to get more information about how you can do things like including unsubscribe links, and improving all the other elements that you need to get sorted. Is there anything else? If there's any other questions that we've not had the chance to address today, feel free to get in contact with Brian or with Chris or with myself, and we can put you in touch with one of the team who can help, or if you wait for that email to come through from me, that's also another great way to get in touch. I would love to thank you all for attending today. I know we've stolen 57 minutes of your time today, but I really hope you found it useful. You've got loads of value about what you need to do to make 2024 the year your email really works for you. So thanks for all attending, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.